welcome to this Peerdom webinar. Each one of these webinars is based around a different theme. So we are today exploring remote work, but really, there's a million different takes on remote work out there, I think. And Jake, who we've invited to talk about it, can give you perspectives on all of these different aspects of remote work. But I think today we were really interested in saying, okay, whether you're kind of on one extreme, this, remote first, heavily distributed, everybody working across the planet type place where your only communication and connection is through like a laptop, or on the other side, a kind of classical traditional organization who just now post-pandemic has the capacity to work from home for 2 hours every morning before going to the office. There's still like this sensation that all of us are touched by the remote work and distributed work bug in some way, and that there's no going back. So considering the fact that we are working in a more distributed way and that the office place has become a lot more fluid and flexible, we wanted to explore especially like what are some of the anti-patterns that we're observing and the dysfunctional dynamics? What are some of the things that are a bit, what's lost in working remotely, and what's kind of quickly destabilizing in the workplace from losing this personal connection? And again, how can we perhaps avoid or at least treat some of the symptoms? And for that reason, we invited Jake Slater, who's sitting here next to me, and who is a consultant working exclusively in helping teams work better remotely. So this is kind of his specialty. And today I wanted to explore some of these patterns that he's observing across different remote teams with him, and to understand a little bit better, like what might you teach your team or encourage as practices or tools and rituals or just mentalities in order to make this whole distributed work thing a little smoother. So the format today will be Jake is going to take it away in a second and present us a few slides and kind of set the stage a bit. After that, the floor is open for discussion. So please, at any time, write any questions or comments or themes into the chat, and I will relay those as fluidly as I can to Jake. And of course, the floor is open for others too. So if you have insights or answers, or you just want to say something, feel free. That whole middle section is around us discussing and trying to dig a bit deeper into the theme. And then I'll put on the bookend of the webinar a couple ideas about how Peerdom, the tool, and might actually help avoid some of these remote dysfunctions, and about our thinking about how the tool can assist in distributed work. And yeah, with that, I'm gonna pass the baton over to Jake. Take it away.
Thanks, Nathan. To be honest, that was a perfect introduction, so I don't have a huge amount to add to that. Other than just to build on the idea that obviously remote work and working in these new ways is very emergent and developing and changing for all of us, and everyone has different experiences and perspectives. So what I've tried to do here is kind of collate together some of the common experiences that we find in teams that we work with that hopefully are helpful. Sometimes it can be helpful just to kind of put a term or an idea to something in order to start exploring it. But very much I'm doing that also inviting you all to share your experience. And there are a few points in this where I'll ask you to share ideas specifically. So yeah, I'm not wanting this to be me just sharing ideas. I want this to be a space for us to all share ideas together. So presenting with that in mind. So I'm going to share my screen, and first off, so who am I? So I run the Remote Culture Club, and we help mission-driven teams specifically. So we like working with mission-driven teams that might be nonprofits, foundations, people involved in philanthropy, but also for-profit companies that care about a mission as much as they do making money. And the reason we like working with them is they generally care about this stuff already. So they're invested in the idea of their employees having a positive experience and invested in their team working well together. And we help them become more effective and connected through coaching and training. And what we're going to do today, as Nathan said, is first off, consider some kind of benefits and struggles of remote working. And we're going to look at some data behind those ideas as well. Then we'll explore some common dysfunctional dynamics. These are things that we see come up in teams again and again, and have a think about what you can actually do about them. And then Nathan and I are going to try and connect what we've talked about today with peerdom and how you can use it, and actually how you can put some of these ideas into practice. So I just wanted to say before we get into it, Nathan has actually appeared on our podcast in the second episode. So I'll share the link for this towards the end of the chat. But if you're interested in thinking more about how peerdom and remote work are connected, that's a good follow-on listen. So to start us off, I want to do a little check-in. And actually, this is something that we try and do in our own remote working, and something that we try and encourage clients to do to try and make these remote spaces more engaging and connected. So I just want to do a go around, and if you could share your name, what you do, and just in a sentence, what do you find hard about not seeing the people that you work with in person? And I guess it's only fair that I should start us off. So I'm Jake. I've already talked about what I do. And I think what I find hard about not seeing the people I work with in person, I should have thought about this before, really. Well, I'm going to kind of cheat on this a little bit. I saw a colleague I worked with for the last 2 years. I saw her in person for the first time last week when I was visiting the city that she lives in. And in hanging out with her for 2 hours, I learned so much more about her than I have in the last 2 years. So something that I miss is connecting with people and their personalities outside of work, and finding out about their life and their hobbies and what they're interested in. So I'm just going to say, Victoria, can I pass it on to you? So if you could share that, and then, yeah, pass it on to someone else.
Yeah, I have colleagues that work across the globe, and for me, the biggest struggle is actually feel like I know what they've been up to, and so passing on the baton and a lot of the work that we do, that has been, I think, one of the biggest struggles. Yeah, and what I miss the most is also the casual talks. Shall I pass it back to? I'll pass it to Mark, if I may.
Yeah. I'm Mark from Zurich, organization developer focused on self-organization. And I think I had very good experience with people I never met in real. And I had a couple of experiences where I really feel the sensing between the lines is more difficult for me. It's just seeing the person on the screen. So that's part of my work, being sensitive to what's between the lines. So I think I catch part of it, but not all of it.
Yeah,
and I hand over to Edouard.
Hi everyone, thank you, Mark. I'm a software specialist, and I used to work in a digital agency for SEO, SEA, and actually I was in a remote, and it was always, I was kind of alone, and when we're working on projects with clients, and I was working with SEO specialists and SEA, it's always hard to work together, you know, hand in hand, when you were in Paris and there was always in Montpellier or in Corse. And so it was quite hard to follow, you know, the projects and to have discussions with your clients, the specialists, and myself. And also, obviously, like your chit chat afterwards that you can have with your colleagues, because I think it's important to have, you know, in a safe environment, like a nice feeling with your coworkers, because actually you feel involved, you know, and so you are kind of empowered in the organization, and I was just alone. And so yeah, I missed just the contact, the human contact, especially during the COVID, the lockdown. I don't know for you guys in Switzerland, but in France it was quite hard. And so yeah, it was difficult. I pass the button to the board. Sorry for my business.
That would be Bjorn. Yeah, I am ready. Okay, I'm Bjorn. I'm a Norwegian living in Italy, working as a team coach, working with systems. And I also do a lot of trainings, leadership trainings, a bit of organizational stuff as well. And yeah, good question. Also made me think, and I think what not seeing the people that I work with in person is that when I see them on the screen, I see when they are disconnected. I see when they're writing an email. I see when they're looking at the second screen. And of course, that is the human connection that can get lost when you have the virtual reality, that people think they can get away with. I mean, maybe they wouldn't look at the phone while they had a meeting with you if you were in a healthy organization. But that also happened, no? But yeah. And I'll pass it on to Gwendolyn.
How about we do it like this? In case we're passing to those who don't feel like appearing, you can put it on your camera if you're willing to participate in the check-in. If not, we'll just kind of wrap it up as it were.
Let's hear from Frederick.
All right. Hi. Hello, everybody. I'm Frederik Denken. I'm based out of Belgium, in Europe. What do I do? It's a good question. I always have to think about that. So actually, I'm the owner and firekeeper of a small company. We specialize in DevOps as a service for digital product companies, for those that are familiar with those terms. And in a sentence, what do I do? What do I find hard? Well, I really needed to think about it because I'm starting to find it easier and easier, to be honest. I've been doing it for a while, but I think the thing I struggle the most with still is trusting people that they're conscious enough themselves to speak up and express whatever challenges they may have. Yeah.
Nice.
Check. Oh yeah, I need to pass on the talking stick. Who I think Catherine is the only one who turned on her video. So Catherine, you have the word.
Sure. So my name is Catherine. I work as head of employee experience, so kind of taking care of the HR side of things. And I think for me, it's your connection is one thing, but I think the challenge is really if you've got a hybrid working environment, I think for me that makes it doubly complex. I think if everyone's working from home, that's one thing, but make a hybrid work environment, I think is really like doubly challenging. Yeah, and I think the piece around managing workload, I think, is really hard. Yeah, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's a super important one. Nathan, do you want to go as well?
Sure. Zara, I saw you pop up in there. If you're go for it, please take the baton and I'll follow you afterward.
Okay, so my name is Zara Jawad. I am CEO of a biotech startup. We are based in Cambridge, UK. I think when we work we are lab-based, so a lot of our employees have to be on site in the lab, but those who are remote, I think what I miss the most is what I call the by the way moments. You know, like when you have a thought that comes to your head and you just blurt it out somebody that's next to you. I think that it's the biggest challenge of remote working for me. Nathan, to you. Thank
you. So Nathan, working at Peerdom, as it were, one of the founders. I think one of the things I struggle with most in the distributed and remote work is kind of this pixelatedness of the way that you have to interpret people on the other side. So conversation, for instance, has very little texture, and it's like reflected, and it's coming through in kind of sparse moments, and there's a lot of gaps in between. So for me, that leaves, if you're like in a particularly doubtful state one day, or paranoid or something like that, you start inventing stories around like what the intention is in those words, and like this kind of like artificial creation of stories that you just wouldn't have if you were in the room with someone who you see that they're like, smiling while saying that or something. So I think a lot of this like texture and cues and richness is something that I miss, that is necessarily part of, being in three space with somebody, but like difficult to handle, especially through asynchronous communication. So with that, I will pass it back to you, Jake. Thanks for the check-in round.
Thanks, Nathan. Yeah, I'm definitely, that's something I think about a lot, having the kind of, there are lots of gaps I find in remote working, collaboration and communication, and I'm definitely guilty of filling those gaps and projecting into them, and then realizing later that it was a projection more than anything else. But thanks everyone, that's super helpful for me to get to know all of you better. I'm relatively new as a peerdom companion, so it's nice to just meet all of you, and that really also sets the scene for what we're going to go on and talk about, which is lucky for me. So next I want to talk about some of the benefits and struggles of remote, and we've just talked about what some of the struggles are, and this is based on Buffer's State of Remote Work survey from this year, and we're going to look first at the benefits of working remotely, and then we'll go and look at the struggles. We've just talked about some of the struggles, so maybe we don't need to do this there, but for the benefits, I've sort of just cheekily taken out the words. We've just got the numbers, and I wondered if we could all just take a minute to think about what some of the words here might be, what some people might have said on this survey would be the biggest benefits of working remotely. And to give you just a tiny bit more context, so this is 3,000 remote workers from around the world, people who work remotely all the time, people who are hybrid, all sorts of different setups, business owners, junior, mid, senior level people, all different sorts of people. So have a think about what a benefit might be, and then please post it in the chat. And I'd like to get a few here. Yes, Catherine, thank you for kicking us off. Flexibility, work-life balance, less time commuting, connection, diversity. Yeah, nice. More time with family, definitely a big one for me. And friends, yeah. Okay, I get to do the big reveal now. Let's see what people said. So very much along the same lines, flexibility is a big one in how people spend their time, in being able to choose work location, to live where you would like, flexibility in career options, the ability to better focus, better financially, prefer to work in your own space, more time because you don't have to commute. So very much in line what we've said. And I don't think anything like particularly surprising or different to what we've said. And on the bigger struggle, I feel like in our check-in, we kind of talked about what these things might be. So I'm not going to do the big suspense reveal. Let's just have a look at what people said. So I think there are some interesting things here. It's interesting to see 9% of people said difficulty focusing, which is more people than had said they find it easier to focus working remotely. I definitely find it way easier to focus working remotely, so that's a surprising one for me. But other struggles that we didn't mention at the start, working across time zones, obviously a big one. Not being able to unplug kind of fits along with that. Staying motivated. I feel like lots of the things that we mentioned in the check-in was about kind of connection and seeing the whole of someone and being able to read situations properly. But yeah, I think it's interesting to kind of spend a bit of time connecting with this data to like set the scene for how people are experiencing working remotely more. And next, I just wanted to look at one framework this is something that we think about a lot. So these 5 states of remote work were coined by Matt Mullenweg. And if you don't know him, he's the co-founder of WordPress and the CEO of Automatic. I think they've got about 2,000 employees in 100 different countries, so a lot of experience with setting teams up remotely. And I think this framework can be a kind of helpful way to place yourself and your organization to understand where you're at and what you want to work on. I think there's 2 things to say about it. I think the first thing is that it's very much written from the point of view of a kind of COVID transition to remote work from the office to working remotely. And I think the other thing is it's kind of written from a manager's point of view. But if we go from level 1 upwards and just talk it through. So level 1 is the emergency. We're imagining people all of a sudden can't work in the office. They're sent home working from home. And there's this panic because managers really feel like we can't know what they'll do at home. If we can't literally see them working, then is anyone actually working? Level 2 is like slightly beyond that panic, but we're still copying the office. This is an idea that we think about a lot. So are you really making the most of the opportunities of remote work and minimizing the challenges? Or are you just copying what you've always done before and trying to replicate it as exactly as you can in an office? So everyone has to be online 8 hours a day. Ideally, those are the same 8 hours. And ideally, we know when someone is online because we can see a green dot next to their name. Level 3, tools and collaboration. This is where most of our kind of clients are at when we start working with them. And I imagine this is where a lot of people in this room are. This is when you start to think, okay, actually, there are some benefits to remote working. We can collaborate in a different way than we've done before. We start using tools like Google Docs, very entry-level one, but maybe advanced, we're moving up to using things like Peerdom as well. And then I'm going to jump up to level 5, Nirvana, so designing your work around your life. I don't know whether this is really an achievable goal for a lot of organizations. I think it's fine to say that. But this would be where everyone in the organization has very clear role and goals, knows what they need to do, knows what they're working towards, and is able to plan out their work around their life accordingly. And then obviously level 4 is kind of between that Nirvana and level 3 collaboration. And I think the big shift here is thinking about asynchronous work. And we'll touch on this a little bit more later on, but asynchronous work gets talked about a lot, but I think sometimes we struggle to define it. So for the purposes of this, synchronous work is calls, meetings, real-time collaboration and chats. Even if you're doing Slack messages, but with someone in real time, that's synchronous. Asynchronous, everything else, writing an email or a document, commenting on something to give feedback, recording a voice note, basically working on something with someone else, but you're both engaging on it at different times. And I think learning how to work asynchronously and when to do it is the kind of the big step that organizations should be aiming towards to work better together remotely. So the first thing to say about this is I don't know whether this can actually be true, but this is from another survey, Almanac's State of Modern Work Survey 2023. And so based on their survey, they said on a typical day, a professional spends 28% of their time in meetings, 33% responding to email, and 34% looking for files and documents. So there's only 5% of time left over to do deep work, have a break, do the things that the work that you really want to be doing. And yeah, like I say, I'm not really sure this can be true, but I think it's illuminating and it kind of illustrates the challenge with a lot of remote work, that so much time is spent in meetings, responding to communication and looking for information. So our goal at Remote Culture Club is basically just to increase that 5% figure and reduce the others. So with that kind of scene set, now I want to look at some dysfunctional dynamics. And these are dynamics that we've seen through doing our coaching and training with remote teams. We've seen the same kind of things pop up again and again, and we've formed these dynamics to help illustrate them. We have 6, but because I want to go a bit deep on them, and because I want to also leave space to think about what you might do about them and some space to chat about them, we're just going to look at 3 right now. And what we'll do, I think, is, I'll go through all 3 of them, and then we can look at them all together afterwards and chat. But as Nathan said at the start, if you have any questions or thoughts, share them in the chat as you go. So the first one, the availability trap. So this is really common, perhaps the most common one we see, and this is when teams require people to be available in order to move work forward. So if you think about a kind of scenario, it might be you're working on something and you've got as far as you can, you're blocked, you've got a question that you need the answer to in order to move forward. And how do you find that information? So if you need someone to answer that question in a direct message or an email or on a call, then you're blocked unless that person is available. So the problem with this dynamic is, one, it requires people to be online at the same time. And then two, it really means that you end up kind of valuing availability. So if you ask me a question and I reply quickly from my phone, and maybe I'm actually not working during that time, but I've got a ping on my phone, then I might feel quite good about that. I feel like I've been helpful. I get this little rush of, oh, I've just been helpful for that person. And it kind of validates that. And it means that we end up valuing being available in that kind of way. But of course, that makes it really hard for people to switch off. And actually, although I might feel good in that moment, I don't really want to be spending my time responding to quick pings on my phone when I'm actually not working. So why is this a problem? So for you as an individual, you have to waste time searching for things or waiting for colleagues to be online. It's not easy to find the information you need, and you feel like you always have to be on. And then for your team, it's this idea of the new presenteeism. So if the old presenteeism was you were in an office together, and even though you'd finished your work or you weren't really in the mood to work more, you still would sit at your desk until the end of the day because you didn't want to leave because you felt like you had to be present. So in the new presenteeism, you feel like you need to be online, whether that's being on Slack or Teams or just being available to respond to things quickly. And the problem with that is then availability becomes synonymous with impact, and conversation is mistaken for real collaboration. So if you ask me a question and I reply with the information, it's not really collaboration if that information was something that could have been easily accessible in a document or on a dashboard or wherever you need it to be. And so unlocking this dynamic requires basically becoming a lot more intentional about synchronous and asynchronous ways of working. And I touched on what those are and how we think about them before. But I think the big mindset shift that we need to have collectively is that it's really easy to think of calls are the milestones in our day or in our week, and asynchronous work is basically what happens between them. And we need to flip that around. So we need to say, actually, the default shouldn't be synchronous time. The default should be asynchronous time. And then you're using synchronous time as these kind of magic moments of collaboration and connection. So how would work look differently, and what would you need if you were to make that mindset shift? So the question I'd like you all to ask yourself, and there doesn't need to be an answer to this, but I think it's a helpful question to think about, is what would your team need if we couldn't work synchronously for 2 weeks? You don't have to run that as an experiment. You could run it as an experiment and see how it is. But I think the things it forces you to ask are, what information would you have to have in place? What would people need to be able to access at their fingertips in order to do their job without meeting up to ask about things? And how would you give people that information and give them access to what they need? So that's the availability trap. Next, we're going to look at the keyhole effect. So the keyhole effect is when, let's say you are looking at the calendar, you see a meeting on there. The meeting's about a project that you're kind of interested in or curious about, or maybe it affects your work in a substantial way, or the people who are in that meeting are working on something interesting, again, that you're curious about and you want to know more about. And to find out what's going on and to influence it, you need to join that meeting. You're kind of looking through the keyhole, and you need to participate in order to have a role and to understand what's actually happening. And this is really common when basically decisions aren't communicated effectively. And that might be because you just have too many meetings and they're unclear. And after the meetings, there's not a proper feedback loop about what happens. But it means that people are kind of caught guessing and feeling like they need to be involved and participate in order to be kept in the loop. So this is a problem for you because then your day is jammed with meetings in an effort to connect the dots. You end up with this kind of meeting bloat, and you probably join a bunch of meetings that you don't really need to be part of. And generally, you also just feel unclear about how and why decisions are made, which is really disempowering and not a good feeling to have as part of a team. And for your team, decisions can be really slow, and the whole kind of process also just feels opaque and confusing. So not good. So unlocking this dynamic requires identifying how decisions are made and communicated. And this is tricky. I think it's important to say. Decision making gets to the heart of a lot of work and often kind of hierarchies within organizations. And so talking about it explicitly can kind of be a bit prickly. And I think it can also feel maybe a bit overly formal to say this process is exactly how we make decisions and how we communicate them. And I think can be hard definitively to say how you do that. But I think the important thing to remember is that it's better to have a go at it and have an attempt and say, this is how we try to make decisions. And then if you're not always able to do that, or if that needs to be updated, that's okay. So the first step to thinking about this is to look at your calendar, maybe the next week or two, and think, what decisions are you making this week? Or to look backwards at the week just gone, what decisions have you made? And the questions I think you want to be asking yourself are, who are these decisions going to impact? And how am I going to communicate these decisions? And when you get yourself and other people in the team thinking in that way, it becomes much easier to start sharing that information more freely and having much more kind of positive and proactive attitude towards decisions, and then having fewer meetings that people are joining when they don't need to. So then the last dysfunctional dynamic we're going to look at, and after this one, I'll just bring the three up on a slide, and I'm curious to hear if people have questions or ideas, reflections, maybe their own dysfunctional dynamics they want to suggest. But this last one is syncopation, and we've kind of taken this idea from music. So in music, syncopation is when the rhythm and the drums are kind of slightly off what you'd expect them to be. And in remote work, the rhythms can be slightly off what you expect them to be for all sorts of reasons. So it might be you have people working in different time zones. You might have people who have different preferences for the times they want to be working. You might have people being off rhythm because they're having different cultural experiences or holidays. It might be a public holiday for someone on a team and not for anyone else. It might be Christmas at the end of the year for most of an organization and then not for some people. And that would be really jarring to have that totally different experience. So why is this a problem? You can end up feeling really alone in your work. And you also just feel unsure about how and when to connect with others. I think remote work can already be isolating. And if you feel even more isolated because you're disconnected from people and working at a different time, that can be kind of not fun and kind of damaging. It's a problem for your team because it means the team really struggles to collaborate, especially across time zones. And also no one knows what others are working on, which is a problem both because it's harder for people to share ideas and collaborate. And personally, for me, it's less fun being part of a team where you're also not able to be interested in what other people are working on if it's directly out of your day-to-day. So unlocking this dynamic requires aligning your team's rhythms. And the important thing to say about that is that that does not mean that everyone has to move to the same place or structure their day in exactly the same way. It's still about trying to make the most of the flexibility that remote work affords, but it's creating shared rhythms. So the kind of classic example that's maybe most familiar to people is doing an annual retreat that's in person. So everyone kind of knows what that is at an organization. Everyone understands how it functions. You know when it is, you can kind of work towards it. You know what work will feel like before it, during it, and after it. And the idea is to try and create more opportunities for rhythm. So thinking annually, quarterly, monthly, weekly, daily, what are the different rhythms that we have as an organization and how can they roll up to something coherent? So I would ask yourself, what are the rhythms of our work for you as an individual, for your team, for your organization? And are these cadences aligned? And again, we're not aiming for this kind of perfect alignment where everything is in sync. that's not possible and probably not desirable either, but more just, are these things working together? Do they roll up to something that makes sense? Do they provide a kind of structure of connection and collaboration for the team that supports people to feel connected and work together? So that is the last dysfunctional dynamic. And now, yeah, I guess I just want to leave this space for if anyone has questions about any of them, if anyone's thinking that sounds good in theory, but what's it like in practice? Or if you have your own dysfunctional dynamic you want to suggest, we're always looking to increase the list.
Great, thanks, Jake. Yeah, I'll kick off the discussion. I have one thought that came to me, which is that in remote work, one of the things that's touted is this ability to work asynchronously with flexibility, perhaps even faster in some ways, because you can be working in parallel. You don't have to like commute to waste your time. You don't have to go into as many meetings. Maybe you don't have all these moments of synchronous work, which could be a time bleed in one way. So you can imagine that it makes work, it speeds it up or makes it more efficient. Yet kind of the cost of doing that so that it doesn't become chaotic is that you have to spend a lot more time being clear on how you work together and documenting things and like, you know, doing this kind of like thinking about like, what are our rhythms, and let's document them and share them as a doc so that we talk about our rhythms. And like, there's all this documentation upon documentation that's kind of the cost of doing it somehow. So I was just having this this thought, like, you know, in some direction you sort of speed up things, but in another you slow it down, because instead of just working, you're also having to document about what you're working on. And do you find, I don't know, is it one of those things pulling slightly harder, or do you actually see advantages to working remotely if the cost is to do it properly, that you always, like, for 1 minute of work you need to do 1 minute of documentation? Or are there ways of avoiding over documenting? I don't know. This is one kind of the thing going on right now.
Yeah, lots of good stuff there. Just because the last thing you said was about avoiding documenting too much, I'm going to respond to that bit first. So I think definitely that's a trap that you can fall into and feel like everything I do has to be documented. I'm going to share every bit of information. We've just kind of won this new project. Here's everything about it for everyone. And I think that's a trap that organizations can fall into. And I think something we try and encourage people to think about is kind of the like minimum viable documentation and creating information that's like user friendly for the person who's going to read it, rather than kind of created from the point of view of the creator. I don't know if I've articulated that well, but yeah, just to say, when you're creating documentation, it's really easy to think, sorry, I'm just seeing comments show up, and I will share the slides. And yes, I wasn't meaning to like hide the other dysfunctional dynamics. I'll definitely share them as well. But yeah, it's really easy to create documentation and just feel really like worthy as I'm creating all this information. Look how helpful I'm being. But actually the mindset shift there, I think, is if someone is looking for the key information here, what will they really need to find, and how can I make it easy for them? And then I think on the like general question about moving fast or slowly, and is this helpful? I think the key thing is to, I think of it as like a lot of this work is basically trying to give individuals autonomy to work at their own pace. And I think that's really hard because you've got to plan really far ahead. You've got to have lots of information available. But I think that's the big unlock really with flexible asynchronous remote working. It's just the idea is people are trusted and autonomous. They're clear on what they need to do. The goals are clear. And then it's how do you provide them with the information that they need to do that? And then the last thing I'll say on this, and then Catherine, I can see you've got your hand up, is that one mindset I try and have is, as much as possible, how can I make it so that the work that I'm doing today makes the work that I do tomorrow easier. So whether it's like for like marketing, whether it's like creating content, it's how do we start by creating long form content and ideas that can be used in lots of different ways. If it's, I'll try and think what other good examples are. But yeah, that general kind of mindset of we may have to move slower by like taking the time as we're doing this now to document it, but that will be worthwhile for tomorrow and the days to come, and for whoever I'm kind of passing the baton on to next. Catherine.
So I work with a couple of people here. I work with Zara at Chrysalis, and I also work with Lisa and Michael at Leclerc. So at Leclerc, I've not been there very long. It's really interesting. We have like super flexible working style. And I think one thing that we've got really right is that we have people can come on site if they want to, but they can also work from home. Because I think not everybody is the same, right? And there's no one solution for everybody. Some people need more connection, some people need less connection. And that can be challenging. I guess that brings its own challenges. But I think one thing that is really important is that people understand it's a two-way process, right? That you're giving them flexibility, but they in turn also have to have some flexibility. It's a two-way thing, two-way street.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think on the first thing, you're right that everyone has their own preferences and needs, and really having open conversations about what those are, and then trying to find middle ground that works for people as well as possible is the key thing. Definitely, I'm hearing more and more organizations say that they have kind of found a middle ground where they maybe do some working from home, maybe do some work from an office or co-working space. Maybe if they are far apart from their colleagues, more and more people I'm hearing are doing quarterly retreats where they get together. So I think people are finding their right kind of balance and rhythm of spending time together and spending time apart. And people are realizing what suits them when and what's best for different kinds of work, which I think is really exciting. I think obviously for teams who have started working remotely because of COVID, it's been this huge disruption to how they've worked. And I think more and more, it seems like people are settling into a new way of working that is kind of more intentional. So I think that's really exciting. And I think definitely on flexibility, it's a two-way street. It's very idealistic just to think that people can work totally when they want and where they want and what works for them.
And I think, and the other thing as well that I think what you were saying is really important, which I think has maybe also changed a little bit since COVID, is this idea of designing working relationships and how our team works together, which when we were face to face, we didn't really think about that so much. And I think now we are hybrid, or, having this different kind of working environment, I think organizations are more thinking about that. And I think it's really important because it wasn't something that we ever discussed before, even though it's really fundamental to how a team works.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's a really positive thing. And I think the fact that we didn't do it before doesn't necessarily mean that we didn't need to do it before. I think it's a really positive that we're having these conversations now. I'm just reading this comment from Margot. That documentation hunt is a problem in the office as well. It's as though remote work has heightened that knowledge management, second brain, MBD deficit. It's no one's job to solve it. Yeah, I think you're right that it's kind of like exacerbated an existing problem. And I think it goes back to this point around autonomy, I think, where if you think of it as the goal is that everyone has clear goals and the information that they need and the autonomy to do the work they need to do, whether they're doing it 9 to 5, whatever time they want, in whatever time zone they want, then you have to get much sharper on how you document things your knowledge management, basically. And I think that's a good thing too, needing to be sharp on it. And I think that's kind of a general principle with a lot of this remote work stuff. It's exactly the same thing as Catherine was just saying. The fact that we need to have these conversations now and we need to be sharper on them and we need to say this is how we do things around here, I think is actually a good thing. But obviously it takes time and it's a bit of a slow progress. But I think it is worth it in the end.
It also makes me think sometimes about this like documentation problem and about, you know, how much is too much, how much is not enough, what's the angle that you should be taking so that people read just the right parts out of it and don't get flooded with information. How do you manage knowledge and, you know, store documents so that there's not all this fluff that you have to work through, but also, you know, not missing documents in there. I actually wonder if this isn't like a skill, kind of like a second language that just hasn't been taught to us yet, because we were kind of like thrown into this new way of thinking about things where like information is stored outside of our brains and outside of those around us. And we're all just like dealing with like having to speak as another language without being trained on what the efficient ways of doing this are. So I kind of have this you know, almost dream that educational programs will start to emerge that teach people how to speak asynchronously effectively and to trim the information into the right kinds of ways, because it's just naturally happening anyway. And we find the clashes of like people trying to speak in the old language to one another and talking past one another. So I have this whole like, if you ever want to start a college class on asynchronous communication or knowledge management for, you know, the next century, I think it could be a winner. Yeah,
totally agree.
Just a side thought, because it feels like an undeveloped skill that also I don't feel very good at, but have to practice every day, and definitely did not learn this in school.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I think there's two really clear skills there, which is one, writing, and like writing for remote work and asynchronous communication, particularly if people are across different time zones, different languages, writing clearly, and the presentation of information, you know, putting the key things up top, context underneath. There's lots of stuff that people can do. And then I think the second skill is the kind of design thinking, human or user-centered design, just really constantly being in the mindset of how whether it's customers or clients or colleagues, how are other people going to experience this, and how can I design this or create this in a way that is friendly to who's going to be on the other end of it. I think those are two really kind of crucial future work skills.
Great. Thanks, Jake. I'm gonna steal the stage for a minute, for these last 10 minutes, as it were. The idea is always that we try to link a little bit of the theory and our chat into something inside of the tool to try to make it, you know, tangible. Like, is there a tool or practice that can, you know, speak to these dysfunctions or perhaps work around them? So today, I mean, and by the way, yeah, Jake mentioned that he'll be sharing the other dysfunctions, so we'll keep you in a little bit of suspense until then and capture your attention. But meanwhile, I just wanted to jump through a couple things that kind of clicked in our heads as we thought about these dysfunctions and the way that that Peerdom has been designed. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Peerdom, this is a role map, and the role map is composed of these different roles. And one of the kind of fundamental principles is that Peerdom is really built around flexibility. So like remote work being this, like, you know, unlocking of flexibility in terms of where you work from, when you work, etc. We've tried to imagine also a future of work where it's like the way that jobs are designed is slightly more fluid and more flexible as well. And this fluidity or flexibility is represented kind of in a core concept, which is that although, you know, jobs previously were considered like you're hired and you have a single position with a single job title and so forth, in a kind of more flexible way of defining your work, you can hold several roles, or your job is split or fragmented into smaller pieces. And this is kind of baked into the fabric of the tool, which is that, you know, you have your colleagues listed out over here, and as you click around, you can see which roles they're holding light up on the left-hand side. And there are people, for instance, who are holding a single role. So we look and this person has, you know, one single role, but others who are, you know, holding roles across different teams and who have maybe split their work into smaller units. So this basic fundamental flexibility is kind of available by just allowing one person to hold several roles, and one person, it doesn't force you to do that. By all means, if you want, just assign one single role to one person. But you can also imagine just taking a small step of flexibility, which is like, what if, you know, you have your main position and you take on one side role? So for most people, I think it's not a huge conceptual leap to imagine just working on some other side project. And I think the way that we actually work is already more or less split into different roles. It's just not represented like this in kind of classical job positions. So this flexibility is on the individual level and represented by splitting a job into smaller roles. And again, visible through a person's profile by holding separate roles. And then we also kind of think about organizational flexibility. So the reason we built this app store and that you can pick and choose what different apps you install is also because we understand that each organization has a different business maturity, different processes that they're wanting to focus on right now or otherwise. And the idea is that you can kind of pick and choose different modules that you install for your organization. And the notion is that everything else remains hidden from you. So instead of throwing the full feature set at you with tons of menus and options, and in principle a larger learning curve, we start very minimally with very few things installed, and you can pick and choose by adding an app on top of that. So this like idea of flexibility kind of made I'll skip the stone across the water a bit and think of it in terms of splitting work into smaller units, and then also about customizing your installation of Pyramid through a selection of different apps. And then the other thing that I thought about is it really related to these dysfunctions that Jake had mentioned is, for instance, in the availability trap, he talks about this idea of you feel like you have to be online or available in order to answer problems because it's a little bit unclear about like who might be able to do that, and you kind of feel this guilt also about being like, I can be the only one who can unlock that. I think one interesting aspect of having this shared roadmap and sharing it with the whole team is that you kind of create a shared understanding of what people are working on and what the competencies are in-house, and that's irrespective of whether they're online or offline. So there's this persistency that happens in the background, which is that it doesn't matter if I'm online or offline. There's a sense of connection and belonging about understanding where you fit into the picture. And you know, at our team at Peerdom, we're scattered a little bit across the world, and I think that it's helped us build this kind of baseline trust and transparency around what's being worked on, around who is responsible for what, and having that kind of document which is shared and in the background provides some sort of base layer about being like, I don't really have to be available in some sense, because it's very clear about what I'm responsible for and what others are responsible for and what work is going on. So it alleviates a little bit of this self-pressure. And he also mentioned in the syncopation issues that you know, nobody knows what others are working on is one of the symptoms. And again, the work map in some sense is that in principle, it's like who is working, what are their responsibilities. And I kind of wanted to dig into one of the apps, which I think also helps define that. So I've installed the Projects app, and the Projects app is just a way of like being more explicit around cross collaborations. So it's defining work, which is where people come together from different disciplines to work on something for a while and then disband. So kind of like mission-based team, you might think of it like. And this app allows you to add projects and then to define like start and end dates and so forth. And you can compose a team of people coming from different roles effectively. And you can group them, of course, and kind of organize them in this dashboard of the different ongoing projects. So in addition to roles and responsibilities, you gain another layer of information, one which is like, okay, these are persistent tasks and roles and responsibilities going on, but these are the kind of ephemeral ways that those are coming together to get actual work done. And this project layer is able to be added to the map as a layer. So when I come back here, I can turn on the project layer, and by doing so, you kind of see the projects mapped around the periphery of the organization. So this shows you a secondary perspective on the organization, on ongoing work, that it ties into the roles and responsibilities already defined at the base. So for instance, on this project, we might see that, you know, there are these people working across these different teams in particular roles. And it shows this relationship visually so that people can see what's the ongoing work, what are the ongoing responsibilities, and what's the relationship between these two. And likewise, in terms of visibility over what's going on. And I think especially in the keyhole trap, we had this idea of being like, I don't have enough information. I don't really know what progress is. I don't know what decisions were being made. Another app that can be of use is the goals app in this case. And you can define, for instance, an overarching goal and some sub goals or ways of measuring your progress toward that goal. You can kind of update them and so forth naturally here inside of the actual goals app. But just like with the project app, there's this kind of dashboard where you input the goal data and say, this goal is, you know, part of the communication team or communication group objectives. But you can also then kind of situate it geographically on the map by adding it as a layer. So if I turn on the goal app, you see overlaid what the progress toward all of the goals on top in the organization is. And this creates a kind of overview of what the progress is across the different teams, across the different roles and so forth, and also gives each person a kind of personal view on their profile about which goals they're involved in. And also, I didn't mention this earlier, but they have a kind of, are they involved in any projects as well? So this kind of multi-dimensional information can serve as a way of keeping up to date on who's responsible for what people are working on, how they're coming together to work on things, and how that work is progressing, which is a kind of common documented reference that everyone can refer to. And I think in some sense alleviates a little bit of the symptoms that Jake has been talking about today by providing a kind of common reference point that everyone can latch around, whether they're together in the office or, you know, fully distributed. So with that said, those were my kind of links into peerdom today that talk about these dysfunctions. And we are wrapping up the hour just on time. And if there aren't any closing words today, I would just mention a couple closing ideas. Number one, Jake will share these links and also the presentation. Also, I believe you have some mention of a course that you have as well, Jake. And yeah, check out that podcast that he mentioned as well, because I go more into the way that roles split and how that kind of flexibility can really help personalize or tailor every individual's job inside of the organization. So I think there are some points to be reflected upon. And yeah, thank you all for your participation today and for being here. Jake, I'll let you wrap it up and sound the gong.
Just to say that was very impressive, Nathan, in relating that all to peerdom. That was brilliant. I love that. And just to say, yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Really nice to meet you all. I hope there have been interesting takeaways from this. And yeah, there's lots of resources and podcast newsletter on our site. So if you're curious, head over there. Thanks so much. Nice to see you all.